Ubisoft are absolutely on fire right now, with one of the biggest casualties being the imminent or formerly imminent release of the Assassin's Creed Black Flag remake. You probably already know the name because the Assassin's Creed Black Flag remake Resynced has been out there for the last few weeks or a couple of months or so, and apparently it was about to drop in March, but now it's been pushed back into financial year 27, which, could go all the way into 2027. If you haven't been keeping up with the news, overall, Ubisoft are pushing the reset button on their entire business model, doing a complete restructuring, and leading to, like I said, various casualties, including Assassin's Creed Black Flag's remake, although that has only been pushed back by up to a year, with the Prince of Persia remake being cancelled overall. We'll get to some specifics in time because the Prince of Persia stuff is genuinely baffling. That game seemed to be ready to drop and was apparently going to release on January 16th, so a few days ago. I'll get to that later in the video. We should talk about Assassin's Creed a little bit because we do have some updates from Insider Gaming's Tom Henderson revealing that the original plan for the Black Flag remake was to launch March 19th as a digital-only release. The game was planned to go gold in the first week of February. Speculating after that over on X, Henderson said he thinks it might drop in October, like 3 to 4 weeks before GTA, to replace Assassin's Creed Hex's intended release window, as that game also seems to have been pushed into 2027. Ridiculous. I don't know how many people remember when Ubisoft got out there and laid out their entire roadmap for Assassin's Creed. They were going to do this overarching quasi-live service launcher hub thing called Assassin's Creed Infinity that would apparently govern all these different games that you could plug into. You can see it in Assassin's Creed Shadows, where you're rotating through different parts of an overall timeline and then choosing which games to jump into. And to get that over the finish line, or to get people excited about it as well, they started to say, hey, look, we have all these different games coming out. We have Assassin's Creed Hex, which is meant to be a horror take on Assassin's Creed. It's meant to be more about witches and witchcraft and that kind of stuff. And it's one of the only games that had a conceptual teaser. You also have Assassin's Creed Jade, which is their version of the game that's set in China. And eventually we got Assassin's Creed Shadows a couple of years after the announcement that I'm referring to. But still, bringing those titles together has clearly been a lot harder for them than they initially thought. And for the most part, they haven't been able to stick to a roadmap to save their lives for the vast majority of this decade. So for Black Flag itself, it is worth mentioning that French magazine Jeux Video over on YouTube revealed a ton of new features for the remake at the close of 2025. They included overhauling the game's combat to be a lot less like the original, and a lot less like the choreographed combat of the original Black Flag or the old school Assassin's Creeds. Apparently, Ubisoft wanted to take the Black Flag remake in more of a direction that would be alongside the likes of Origin, Odyssey, Valhalla, the modern day RPG approach to Assassin's Creed, which personally I don't prefer. Like, I way prefer the super choreographed martial arts, badass chaining together different moves, disarming a dude and throwing his sword at his friend kind of moves. But apparently, that stuff doesn't sell as well as the Origins trilogy onwards. So that was apparently what they wanted to do with Black Flag. So your mileage may vary in terms of the direction they were taking Assassin's Creed, the Black Flag remake anyway. But the combat was one thing that they were going to be overhauling. The huge thing is that they were looking to ditch the modern day segments of the game entirely. That was all the stuff where you would play as a employee of Abstergo / Ubisoft. At the time, it made perfect sense because we were, well, not perfect sense, but it was fun. Like, we were coming off Assassin's Creed 3. You had one of the biggest twists in Assassin's Creed history where you actually revealed that you were playing as a Templar and not an assassin. The achievement part being, how'd you like dem apples at the time? And then it was always that conversation on where the hell do you go after this? Desmond dies at the end of Assassin's Creed 3, the former protagonist of the entire series. What can you possibly do? They also had Patrice Désilets leave the franchise overall, like the creator of the franchise, had stepped out during AC3. So they'd kind of run out of road in terms of the different bits and pieces of the plan that were initially put forward. The initial idea for Assassin's Creed was meant to be 6 games, 3 games where you were learning about how Desmond was, becoming more powerful over time, learning all these different skills, all these different assassins, and then you would cut to the modern day and he would be able to use all those different powers in the modern day. Nolan North talked about this across the 2010s, and clearly the Assassin's Creed series blew up so much, became so popular that Ubisoft were like, we're just going to keep doing these, and Patrice Désilets was like, well, I'm going to go and do other things. But still, the modern day stuff, when you had Desmond who had died at the end of AC3, Assassin's Creed Black Flag then had this weird modern day thing where you were playing as an employee working for Abstergo, kind of trying to find out what had happened to Desmond's corpse. It was very self-aware. It was very continuing the general tone of the how'd you like them apples thing from AC3, of being like, well, we're going to address the fact that Assassin's Creed is just infinite. They let you play as an employee who was making Assassin's Creed games within Assassin's Creed, and then they still tried to tie that into everything that was happening with the Isu and the race of gods that came before. Even as I'm remembering all this stuff, I don't think most people care about it anymore. I used to love all this stuff across the late 2000s and most of the 2010s, but clearly with the likes of Desolé and the rest of the creative team that were there at the beginning leaving over time or being less involved over time, Ubisoft and the people who stepped in weren't able to continue those threads, which is why all that sort of wider lore stuff has only been put to the side over time. So for the remake, they just said, well, we'll just ditch it altogether. You know, they can't necessarily make that stuff work. You can argue that most people wouldn't even want to do those things anymore anyway, in terms of a first person exploring some offices, some game development offices in real time, trying to find out what happened to Desmond's body. Like that's a plot point from 15 years ago at this point. So that was a major point that they were going to be getting rid of. There was also going to be a ton more loot and RPG inventory management with loot stats, gear stats, and Edward himself having different combat stats. Again, just like Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla. And the whole thing was going to be made in the Assassin's Creed Shadows Anvil engine, which is a beautiful, bit of kit. Like Assassin's Creed Shadows, for as bloated as that thing is, does look absolutely stunning. And you can imagine the different locales, the overall visual footprint of AC Black Flag being done in that engine. That will be something to turn heads. The really crazy thing, though, is that they delayed it at such a late stage. It was meant to drop in March, as Tom Henderson talks about, and that's only a couple of months away. So you would have to imagine that with him saying the game was going to go gold at the start of February, that thing was feature complete. They were in the bug testing phase. So maybe, it's not going to take an entire other year to come out. But I can't believe that they didn't realize until they were this close to launch to be like, oh, actually, we need many more months on this thing. It's not unprecedented in the gaming industry, but they could easily do with a win coming off the biggest takeaway around all of this, which is the cancellation of the Prince of Persia remake after now 6 years of it being public. It was revealed in 2020, being made by Ubisoft Mumbai and Ubisoft Pune. That version of the game wasn't received very well, so they ended up rebooting it internally. They took it off those studios. They gave it back to Ubisoft Montreal, who are the studio that made the original Prince of Persia games, well, the 2000s trilogy that everybody fell in love with, Sands of Time, Warrior Within, and Two Thrones. They gave it back to them. They said, you guys fix this. They then spent the last 5 years, assumedly, putting the whole game together. And then at the very end, the 11th hour, Ubisoft stepped in and said, that's not good enough, which is just, that's the bit that I really can't get my head around. Because it truly seems insane to have this massive, studio overhaul and throw out the one project that people were genuinely excited about, even with the hiccups that came with that initial footage of being like, it's a bit rough around the edges, but it's still going to be Prince of Persia. That's just not the case. Henderson has provided a bit of an update on social media, saying the original plan for Prince of Persia, as reported in November, was to release on January 16th. As Tom said, for the past few weeks on the podcast, I couldn't get updated info because of the Ubisoft breaches, which are still ongoing, and that's a bigger story. Found out today it was pushed to late March in December for further polishing, and then canned today. So what the hell, basically. The amount of different Prince of Persia versions that we've had across the last 20 plus years, I don't know why they couldn't just put this thing out. Maybe they were scared because of how badly Prince of Persia Lost Crown performed, but even that massively suffered from not really showcasing its best aspects. I massively champion Prince of Persia Lost Crown. I think it's the best game that Ubisoft have put their name to, in a long time. I think that thing plays supremely well. It is a sublime Metroidvania with a fantastic combat system, lots of really cool camera cuts when you're in boss battles, and an awesome upgrade system with really cool tools that you unlock over time. I love that thing. And I think a lot of people who have played it have gone, why aren't more people talking about this game? Still, it didn't sell well enough, and that studio internally were disbanded and redistributed amongst other studios within Ubisoft. So maybe if you're, big wig looking from the top down when it comes to Ubisoft overall, you just think, well, there's no way that's going to work. There's no way we're going to be able to reclaim the heyday of the early 2000s, because even the cel-shaded reboot with Nolan North from 2009 didn't go down anywhere near enough. But still, to work on a project for 5 years and then have the whole thing canned right when you're expecting it to ship and you're looking forward to that celebration, I think is pretty damn cruel, to be honest. And as I mentioned, many fans were looking forward to this as one of the only positive sounding, fresher feeling projects that Ubisoft had in the works, rather than that infinite conveyor belt of Assassin's Creed projects, which is what we're getting for now and the foreseeable future.